All
This
okay,
conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So presentation today is, I guess, a brief history of what Network Rail's done to deliver the railway system over the last 2 months. And I guess, you know, in a minute I'll come on to a timeline, but certainly it feels like it's been about 2 years, but it hasn't. When I kind of reflect on it, when you look at the timeline, and if I go on to the second slide, I can go straight to that. So COVID-19, I guess most of you you'd be thinking, well, Christmas wasn't that long ago, and then obviously the new year starts. There was some rumblings from China in January about a new virus. By the end of January, we had the first case in the UK. Late February, first death of a UK citizen, although that was overseas. And I remember our health advisor in Network Rail coming into a meeting to say, I've just been to an important update, and the risk has significantly escalated. And when he articulated we could have up to 20 to 30% of our workforce off at any one time, it felt as though it was surreal, unreal. But when you look at the the government advised against non-essential travel in mid-March, and then the schools shut on the 20th of March. We've had to do an awful lot in the rail industry because we've had to keep the railway open, and certainly in the early days of the restrictions, there were a number of days where we genuinely thought, there were going to be swathes of the railway that were going to have to shut. But you can see on this slide here, it gives you a timeline through the various parts and the things that we've done. And I'll also pick up on a few of these in detail, so that some of you may have seen the outcomes of some of the things that have happened, but there was a backstory all the time. Just bear with me. There we go. So the strategic crisis management team were set up. They were set up as a kind of shadow organisation in February, and that was a purposely convened team to manage the COVID crisis and all the elements to it. The crisis management team were meeting daily, and the focus was to look after our people. It was clear that we've got to keep the network open, maintain the integrity of the network, deliver capital investment, and ensure business continuity all where possible. It's been a mass collaboration. We obviously move a very busy network, move a lot of people, and we're connected to all sorts of parts of the industry, the Department of Transport, the Office of Road and Rail, the unions, and the train operators. And certainly, if I reflect over the last 2 months, the challenge from the unions has been relentless and daily, and I've welcomed it. There are things in the past that may have taken days or weeks or months, and the continual challenge by our trades unions, and in particular the health and safety reps, meant that some of those things we had literally minutes and hours to make adjustments to all manner of things. So the unions themselves, I had a meeting with the unions maybe about 3 weeks ago, and I've never heard it before, but we had Unite, the TSSA and the RMT all stopped the meeting and said thank you to Network Rail for doing as much as they've done as quickly as they've done it, which it's nice to hear it, because we don't often get that feedback from union colleagues, but to get 3 in one go was something special, I felt, and they were genuinely grateful that we took on the challenges that they gave us, and we worked actively to keep people safe. So I guess the key thing all the way through is the focus was on looking after our people, We set up a good communications network as quickly as we could. So there was a website which we added to most days, and a lot of briefing material. I mean, made sure that the material was briefed, and there was an awful lot of things to cover to keep people informed, because there was advice coming from the government and various places that we had to deal with on the spot, and that was most days, and lots of stuff coming through all of the time. And just an example, so things like railway employees classified as key workers. Obviously important to keep the railway system open, and it was not lost on us. You know, it was impressed upon us that the railway supplies supermarkets, the railway takes rubbish out of London, the railway gets key workers to work, it gets fuel to the power stations, and you know, we were continuously reminded about the important role that the rail industry plays to keep the UK economy going. So on the coronavirus hub site, which was we produced all sorts of material, and we rewrote a lot of standards. And if I come on to the next slide, when I say looking after our people, we published an FAQ document, and we were very quick off the mark about advice on what people should do in terms of protecting themselves and their workers, if they're, or fellow workers, what to do if they were vulnerable and if they'd had letters from the NHS, what they could do in the workplace, advice on social distancing, working from home, some support on financial well-being. Obviously, compassionate leave is important at this time. We had to adjust our annual leave policy, and we updated our volunteering policy so people could go and help the NHS, and you know, pretty much everything had to change. You know, we were allowing people to drive their own vehicles on Network Rail's insurance policy, car insurance policy, and things like that. So we acted quickly to produce a lot of new policy or updated policy. We completed and published work activity risk assessments. The one that you can see on the screen at the moment is an overarching risk assessment, or part of it, snippets of it. But basically, very quickly, we got our safety reps together, we got our trades union colleagues together, and we put in place, using Public Health England guidance and the similar organisations for Wales and Scotland, to put in place adequate guidance. And at times it was really difficult because there was conflicting advice about masks. There was certainly issues about the supply of masks when you consider the NHS, and it was important that the NHS got masks. But we put in place arrangements and worked with suppliers, and we were able to, as much as we possibly could, keep our workforce at work and manage the risk and the transmission risk of COVID. We identified, from a maintenance perspective, initially we identified 37 tasks that required coming within 2 meters. There were numerous other tasks where we could undertake the work outside of 2 meters. So it was obviously important that we appointed things like COVID champions on site to make sure that people were continually briefed and reminded about social distancing. But there were a number of tasks where we had to completely rewrite the task risk control sheets to make sure that any kind of sub 2 meter working was kept to an absolute minimum. And then when there was sub 2 meter working, that we put in place the very best controls that we had open to us with PPE and other, to make sure those tasks could continue safely. And what you can see on the screen here is a snapshot of the task risk control hub site, and you can see the sorts of tasks that are involved there. Measure shovel packing, which obviously you've got to do around the same bed and either side of the rail. But there's a few others there. And we had to work with our safety reps and our frontline teams to find the best possible way to minimise the sub 2 meter time whilst undertaking those tasks. The next slide shows what happened. I mean, I mentioned earlier on about the amount of or the predicted absenteeism from Network Rail. We obviously had vulnerable people, and it was important that we kept them safely locked away. But you can see here all through January and into February, very few reported cases of COVID, and this is all cases in all settings for Network Rail. So these are people where their families may have had symptoms, so they've had to isolate. But you can see very quickly after the 16th of March, we had a massive rise in people that were either self-isolating or couldn't fully and effectively carry out their work. And I'm pleased to say that as time has gone on, that those numbers of cases have come down very gradually, in some cases not gradually. If you look between April the 6th and April the 13th, you see they've come down quite quickly. And now we are generally managing a handful of cases, and I think obviously in the early days there was a lot of unknowns, uncertainties, and what I genuinely observe now is that our employees are more confident now that we are 6 to 8 weeks into this situation. It's really important. Obviously, it's Mental Health Week this week, and it's really important. We've had some people, who've had to isolate on their own, and they haven't got families. Other people that thrive off the social interaction of work. So we've made a real conscious effort to keep in touch with people, because a lot of us have been working at the other side of a TV screen or an internet Teams meeting. So we've made a conscious effort to keep in touch with people at home. Obviously, with Mental Health Awareness Week this week, we've got a campaign that starts today. But the keeping in touch type activities have been going on right the way through the pandemic. And there are mental health coach teams in various routes that have facilitated the keeping in touch. Another thing that we didn't actually understand at the start was we've got a social networking site called Yammer. It's a Microsoft product. It's a bit like Facebook or Instagram or similar, but it's a business version of that. And we've seen an absolutely enormous rise in traffic and interactions on Yammer, and that's given the ability for people who are uncertain to ask a question, and generally within minutes they get an answer. It's not restricted. You get banter to a certain degree. You get people's opinions, but what we're able to do, and myself and Rupert Lown and Alan Spence, who lead up the safety activities for Network Rail, we've met every morning at 8:30 right the way through the crisis, and we've made sure that we've answered any kind of concerns that have come by Yammer. We've made sure that everybody's got a response, and we've signposted them to the right, either the right managers or the right guidance, or indeed where they've raised challenges. We find it very useful to understand where people have found it difficult to undertake social distancing. And with certain tasks, and that's given us a good feed of direct frontline feedback. But also it helps people keep in touch, which is obviously very important while people are self-isolating. Some of the standards that we rewrote, I mean, the most notable ones in my view, the 155 standard, which is we adjusted the way that we can publish safe work packs for safe system of work planning, but also we issued other standards, CP007, which allowed us to relax some of the recertification dates on competence and how we maintain the railway. CP008, we in a week completely reprioritised the renewals and enhancement work bank, and made sure that we kept up, continue with what we deem to be mission critical essential work, and postponed work that ordinarily you would plan and deliver from a capital expenditure point of view. And the idea of that was to make sure that we protected the most important work. Also, another standard, CP009, and we've had plenty of feedback on this one. And that CP009 gave instructions on working on site and in operational locations. And those standards continue. They'll continue at the moment. They're dated for July and August. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with a vaccine and Public Health England guidance, but I've come off a meeting this morning where we're already looking at extending the period of those documents. So you can see on this slide here, you can see just some I guess some positive consequences of COVID. If you look at the graph at the top in the middle, you can see work outstanding, so overdue work orders in maintenance. It climbed as we got towards Christmas through the autumn of last year, and we've been able to bring that back down, and certainly over the last 4 to 6 weeks. And we put that in part down to obviously some of the standards changes, but also we've got better access to the railway because there are less trains running. So we've been able to deliver our maintenance plans with less waste. We've also, there's a picture in the middle there, which is the measurement train. We're obviously highly dependent on the measuring fleet, and there were risks at times where we felt as though the data managers and the crews on the train, if we lose those, we're going to get in trouble. But in actual fact, what happened? We always run with a slight backlog in the recording program, and certainly through the last 4 to 6 weeks, good progress has been made by running the trains more frequently, the yellow fleet, and recovering previously lost recording runs, which has been extremely helpful from a railway maintenance point of view. And also the email snippet at the bottom, we have a procedure called risk-based maintenance, which basically allows us to vary the maintenance frequencies and legitimately via the standard. And what a number of the routes have done is taken this period to assemble engineers and look at the way that the emergency standards have been applied, but it's given them the ability to spend some time looking into ellipse and applying risk-based maintenance to more assets. So the legacy will be that we become more efficient with maintenance in this respect as a result of the kind of forced agitation of having to revisit maintenance work banks and examine which assets are flagged for what kind of activities in which way. Some other things that we did on the left-hand side of this one here, you can see there's a Network Rail helmet. We collaborated with a lemonade bottle supplier who made us 30,000 visors, which was quite novel, and we had those manufactured very quickly. You can also see that we've had to modify a lot of our work locations and put hand sanitizer stations everywhere. The photograph in the middle at the top, one of the problems that we faced very early on was that our frontline colleagues were very unhappy about sharing vehicles with other people, and this potentially was the closest we got to closing the railway. Working with safety reps, we bought a large stock of polythene and duct tape, and for the first week we made temporary barriers between the front and the back of transits, and that enabled us to and then obviously looking at which people have got driving licenses and which haven't, we made sure that the people in the back were the people that had no other way of travelling. But we also adjusted our driving insurance policy so that people could use their own cars, and we hired somewhere in the region of 3,000 to 4,000 vehicles, additional vehicles, so that people could travel on their own as well. And I'm pleased to say that the kind of Heath Robinson PVC and duct tape approach, what we actually did in parallel was work with the supplier to provide 2 different permanent types of screens. So one is a polycarbonate screen, which you can see on the top right, but also we worked with another supplier to make proper canvas separators that are on poppers, so they can be taken out and cleaned. And we converted about 2,000 of our vehicles with various types of screening, so that we could transport our colleagues around to work sites safely and minimise the risk of transmission. You may wonder why there's a London taxi in the bottom. London taxis have got polycarbonate screens, and with London not being so busy, there's quite a few stood down. We spoke and entered into an arrangement with the London taxi companies. They've got polycarbonate screens, so where we had while we were converting vans and we didn't have enough transport, we had some taxis on permanent hire with technicians in the back, or a technician in the back, whilst their tools were in the van, and we had literally London taxis following Network Rail fault bands with people to site to make sure that we could keep the railway running. Bottom left, you can see an orange icon there, Z scaler. We sent all of our office workers home as per the guidance, but the ability to dial in remotely and use the secure logins, there's 8,000 licenses to do that, and each day that was exceeded. So we've installed a new way of dialing in remotely, and such that people can work from home. In the early days, in the very earliest days, we had people that would ordinarily be working days, working nights at home because they couldn't log in, and that wasn't sustainable in the long run. The right thing to do was upgrade our IT systems, and we've perpetually upgraded the IT systems so that they've become more versatile and more capable through this crisis. And it's a crisis that's driven the speed of change. As we go back to a new form of normal, we have got thermal imaging cameras now on site at the Quadrant in Milton Keynes as a trial. We've also trialled them at Three Bridges Rock. We've consulted fully with the unions. Every Network Rail facility that's got more than 100 staff will have a permanent camera. There's 60 of those that are going to be installed over the next few days and weeks. And we've trialled, like I said, at places like the Quadrant, where we've got a large number of colleagues. And what we found is that our team members have welcomed us being proactive and having theirs and their other colleagues' interests at heart. But more than just the thermal imaging cameras, we're also in the smaller locations. We've got a significant number of handheld thermometers being delivered, and they're looking to come online any moment now. And also for other people, we're issuing personal use thermometers. So we're taking the precautions that we can, and we're trying to demonstrate to our people that we've got their best interests at heart. The railway industry, I think, has come out of it, or the crisis, quite well. So we had a lot of positive media about the vital things that we do with regard to transport. Certainly working with supermarkets and moving Tesco type containers around the country, but also the importance of keeping the rubbish, and rubbish comes out of London on the train, and there are other essential flows of petrol and nuclear fuel and many other things. And I think it's been generally regarded, and certainly in the conversations that I've had, the railway workers are key workers. They worked around the clock to keep the railway system open, and the railway system, whilst we've downturned the timetable at the start of the crisis, the infrastructure has been wholly available. We've helped the NHS with Nightingales, so certainly at Manchester, the logistics on site at Manchester in the Nightingale Network Rail's works delivery team. In the early days when we pulled quite a lot of project work, we diverted staff who were willing to do it to go and help Nightingales, which I think was a positive consequence of work being, of railway work being stopped. I myself have helped with some construction management and design of the Nightingales as a volunteer as well. So I put my name forward, and it was very rewarding to go and work with the British Army and the NHS, and I'm back there again later this afternoon. On Thursday nights, the clap for the carers. Network Rail has kind of joined in, and each Thursday we've lit up a number of new structures blue. You can see in the bottom left-hand side there, you can see that's the Royal Albert Bridge at Plymouth, but we've also done other famous railway landmarks and lit them blue as well in support of our healthcare workers. And finally, I mean, today the timetable ramps up again to I think it's 80% of the timetable. or the normal timetable. And obviously, the logistics of people and stations, it's very difficult. I mean, I've not really spent a lot of time looking at the news this morning, but I saw announcements from Sir Peter Hendy saying that a significant amount of work has been put in by the train operators and ourselves to ensure that we can keep people safe. I guess that will have to be continually reviewed over time as traffic ramps up and footfall increases. But on the bottom left-hand side there, you can see sites. There's a railway site there, and social distancing on site. Certainly, we've got a lot of assurance visits that have been undertaken, and I think our team members on site thoroughly respect the risks. And certainly from what I've seen and the feedback that I've had, and from the supply chain, there's a genuine desire to be seen to be doing the right thing here. If only wearing gloves and goggles could have been enacted as quick as social distancing on site, because the level of communication with COVID, I guess, has been such that people on site have really taken to heart, and social distancing is the new norm. And that's where we are today, really. So new standards, new PPE, and a new way of working. And today we are back to 80% of the timetable. So that's me done. Thank you.
Fabulous, Nick. Thank you very much indeed. That was a very comprehensive presentation. Covered a lot of ground there. Thank you. So our next two speakers now are from TfL, and we have Duncan Weir and Jim Dewar. And just by way of introduction, Duncan is the head of track maintenance for London Underground. He's been in that position since 2017. And he also has a very interesting responsibility in that he is the lead for noise and vibration complaints and air quality improvement, both of which are highly political issues. I'm sure we can all appreciate that. In his background, Duncan is a chartered electrical engineer and he's a fellow of the Chartered Management Institute. He started his railway career as a graduate in 1999, based in Bristol and South Wales, and he's worked in railway maintenance for since that time, covering all aspects of railway maintenance, vegetation and drainage, comms. He was involved with the maintenance modernisation programme in LU, and obviously now track maintenance. So that's Duncan. And then his colleague James. James is the track manager for the Metropolitan, Hammersmith and City lines, and he was appointed into that role in November 2018. He is a civil engineer by training, and he's had quite an array and a multitude of experience. He spent 30 years in the Royal Marines and the British Army as an infantry soldier, and completed 9 operational tours in Northern Ireland, Bosnia, Iraq and Afghanistan. And then he joined the rail industry in 2012 as an incident engineer in the London Underground Control Centre. He has a whole array of educational achievements, both as an undergrad and a postgrad. His postgrad work includes at the University of Texas, McCombs Business School, and the University of Manchester Business School. And Jim is a member of the Association of Project Management, a fellow of the Chartered Management Institute, and a fellow of the Institute for Leadership and Management. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Duncan and to James, and we're delighted that you're here to talk to us today. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Duncan Weir, the head of London Underground's track maintenance, and I'm joined today by one of my track managers, Jim Dewar, to discuss how we have changed our working practices to ensure that we have been able to continue to deliver the maintenance required to keep them moving, whilst protecting the health and safety of the people who undertake the day-to-day activities to keep the lines open. So I'm going to keep my presentation very simple, no bells and whistles, but hopefully the narrative will give you a flavour of what we've been able to achieve in a very short time frame. So to do this, I'm going to split the presentation into 2 parts. The first, I'll give an overview of the general approach, and for the second, Jim will present the practical implementation set out to achieve. And this picture is just one of them, which is the distance in between the people we now maintain when undertaking pre-shift briefings. Yes. So when we all watched the news early in the new year, my team and I were possibly no different from anyone else facing the virus experience in Wuhan into the SARS, Ebola, MERS category of terrible, but in all probability not something that was going to directly impact us. However, like everyone else, we kept our eye on it, and when it hit northern Italy in late February, it became apparent to us that we had to prepare for the worst and hope for the best, which for us at that stage was to prepare for a rate of absence of up to 50%. Because we realised that within a couple of weeks, the virus was going to be a significant issue for us to manage. But at this stage, we thought it would be one of attendance only. So we had to change our way of working and change it quickly. Breaking this down into relevant questions for change, who was the easy part? It was all of us. And aside from drawing up a set of principles, I'll come to in a minute, one of the first decisions my team and I made at the beginning of March, as an example, was not to meet again as a collective, because if one of us had the virus, then we'd all have to quarantine and take the entire management team out. So my managers then separated themselves from their deputies and so on. We thought that through as a principle of the organisation. The why and where were obvious. If we didn't do this, the nature of the work we undertake and the proximity of the people, whether it was management, teams in the depots, and those out on site, would lead to high levels of absence if we didn't change our approach in all areas. So the when, at this stage, it was not seen as an immediate issue, but we recognised that there was always a 2 to 3 week lag between any measures we determined to be the right ones and the delivery of them. So we started to look at the horizon and this upped the sense of urgency. And on reflection, a number of factors played a part in why we're ready and ready ahead of the pandemic becoming a serious issue in London. So the first is that we're engineers and looked at the data, not the emotion involved, and we did not suspend disbelief and decided to act on the facts. The second is the experience of my management team, including Jim, who worked on the military planning for SARS. And we were able to draw on this to determine the need to act. The third is that the team quickly agreed on the measures we would all take. We were aligned and immediately enacted them. And the fourth, if I'm being honest, was I was actually booked on holiday to go to France on the 11th of March, and I wanted most of the preparation to be completed before I left, because we all like a holiday without much interruption, so I could enjoy it. And that said, when I arrived in Paris, the gravity of the situation became apparent, because I took this picture in the Louvre, the world's most visited museum, on Friday the 13th of March. So the French were already starting to lock down. They literally shut the doors as my wife and I left the museum. So I cut my holiday short and came back with the clarity that what we were doing was the right thing, even though we appeared at that time to be at odds with the wider response in Britain at that stage. So this is London Underground's track structure. So the how was the easy part to determine. We have a structure that aligns activity and accountability. So the preparedness of each area, the nuances that had to be overcome by managers, was theirs to deliver. So the what was the tricky part, because the track department is a jigsaw puzzle and each piece is a different approach depending on the type and age of assets on the lines they manage or the network-wide services they provide. So we drew up a set of principles each manager would implement in their respective departments. On reflection, the burning platform made the people changes probably the easiest I've had to experience, because for once, we all recognise the need to do it and do it quickly. So there's no long, protracted consultation involved in this. So with the above in mind, we agreed on 4 basic principles that we'd apply to the respective workplaces and activities we believe would reduce the spread of the virus in our teams and therefore allow us to keep the lines open for business. The first 2 principles, the teams were only to undertake essential maintenance activities. That is, the activities which assure the safety of the line. So we were down to essential work only. Where possible and practical, we will separate individuals from the workplace. For example, inspections, except the ultrasonics team who have to calibrate their equipment, which are a lone working activity, so their people interaction is minimised or eliminated. And the final 2, where separation is not practicable, for example, tasks which through risk assessment require more than one person, a team to undertake, we are to ensure that these teams are separated from the other teams on site route. So as an example for the reroute, which is an activity of a group where we use a welding team, corrective maintenance gang, and signal support as an example, these respective teams are to maintain a minimum of 2 meters distance. And for additional protection, our teams, where practicable, are to keep a minimum distance of more than 2 meters from each other. No mingling or chatting, and are to be provided with a mask regardless of task assessment. And now I'm going to hand over to Jim, who's going to discuss how this worked in practical terms for the teams who work on his lines.
Thank you, Duncan. Good afternoon, everyone. As Duncan has said, we began discussing how the virus would affect our ability to deliver work in late February. As the new spread of the virus ramped up in early March, our main concern was the possibility that we would lose significant numbers of staff to sickness. What could we do to manage or hopefully prevent this? Each manager has a unique set of circumstances due to local and operational factors. My 2 lines are very different in nature and practical day-to-day operation. The Metropolitan line consists of 120 kilometres of open track north of Wembley, with an additional 24 kilometres of track in Neasden Depot. The track is split into 3 sections, each with a section inspection manager and between 7 and 11 in cabins at Rickmansworth, Ruislip and Northwood. Neasden Depot is looked after by a track supervisor with 6 staff and a contract gang of 12. Most of the track is patrolled on days, with faults being passed to the night team. The night team, based from Rickmansworth, consists of a track supervisor with 9 staff and 3 contracted gangs of 10. The Hammersmith and City line from Finchley Road south is all tunnel or cut and cover, so all staff work on nights. The track is split east and west, with supervisors and inspectors working from an office in Baker Street, and the staff split between cabins at Baker Street and Farringdon, a team of 14 in each. The line also has 3 10-man contract gangs. It was clear from the start that there were 2 main elements to achieving a successful outcome. Physical, the practical measures we would have to take to protect the staff and keep the trains running. And then the psychological, how we reassure and support the staff to ensure they remain focused and committed to the task. Starting with the physical. The key to protecting staff was to isolate them. Working from home is not an option in track maintenance. We had to look at the tasks we needed to do and how we might reduce staff interaction when completing these tasks. Our initial plan was to reduce all work to the pure essentials, which I defined to my team as patrolling, inspections of P&C, and the rectification of any faults found within the provisions and the timescales of the relevant standards. Doing this would achieve the objective of keeping the line safe for trains to run, my key responsibility as a track manager. The first thing we looked at was where staff gathered in numbers and why. We have support staff, planners, vegetation and lubrication teams, who for convenience share some of our locations. We asked them, politely, not to do so, but to work from their own locations. We then stopped all face-to-face meetings and started using IT instead. Phone calls, emails, conference and video calls. This was a bit awkward at first, but has now settled down into a routine. It's amazing how a 3-hour meeting can be boiled down into a 30-minute conference call. I have 34 patrol routes covered once or twice a week, 16 on nights, the rest on days. Day patrols require a minimum of 3 staff per patrol. Night patrols require 1 person. Therefore, on days, my minimum team size is 3. A cabin with 7 staff has a supervisor and 2 patrol teams, a 9-man cabin, 3 patrol teams. To avoid one member of staff being infected and taking out 2 or 3 teams, we introduced split shifts on the Met, a morning team and an afternoon team. If one team were to be lost, we could still maintain the patrol schedule using the remaining teams. For the larger cabin, with 3 teams, we brought in additional accommodation by placing a trailer at Moor Park, as you can see the blue trailer on the slide. This is space for 3 staff with external access to a small drying room and a toilet. On the H&C, things were not quite as simple. Each cabin has 14 staff, so isolating teams was much more difficult. To overcome this, we split the staff into red and blue teams, running a one-on, one-off roster. This reduced the number on shift to 7 per cabin. This was still too many and needed to be reduced further. So we asked the patrol staff not to use the cabins. We arranged to send them the documents they needed every night via email, and they were instructed to go straight from home to the end of the patrol. They then catch the last train to the start point, conduct a patrol, and go straight home. By doing this, we reduced the numbers to a maximum of 3 in the office or cabins on each shift. For inspections, I have 7 P&C inspectors, 2 on days who cover Neasden Depot and Hammersmith, 2 on nights at Rickmansworth, and 3 at Baker Street. Given the complex nature of most of the P&C, the inspectors tend to work in teams of 2. To separate them from the rest of the staff, we brought in additional vehicles. They became, in essence, self-contained teams, only needing to access either Rickmansworth or Baker Street to complete their paperwork. For the CM works, the heavy lifting, literally, fell to the contract gangs. Currently, 90% of our corrective maintenance work is completed by these gangs. We asked the gangs to go straight to site and not to come into the office or use the mess facilities. Briefings, passage of information, documentation are all now covered by phone or email. Where this is not possible, then face-to-face briefings are restricted to the track supervisor and the gang SPC. We also set up drop boxes at both offices for paperwork that required a signature, say safety critical licenses, which must be signed. Tools and materials are either pre-positioned at site or collected from segregated areas at Rickmansworth for the Met and Hammersmith for the HNC. Corrective maintenance work by its very nature is a team activity, be it 4 men with nips moving a sleeper or signals, welders and P&Es supporting the track. The easy option would have been to say, if a fault won't stop trains running in the morning, then don't fix it. That would not have been a sensible approach to take. Simple faults would have deteriorated, eventually leading to a totally unmanageable work bank and service affecting failures. We took the pragmatic approach of reviewing our work bank regularly and continuing to complete work where we could. Good communications, common sense, simple common courtesy when planning and executing works with other teams has been the key here. Where teams cannot maintain social distancing during tasks, we have issued face coverings and gloves and gel and wipes. Tasks that were previously done concurrently are now done sequentially. This gives teams the space to complete their tasks without having too many in a workspace at any one time. However, external factors also play a part here. Our colleagues in track access and power control have had to reduce their numbers on shift to accommodate social distancing in the control room. To maintain engineering our access, this has led to the introduction of block switching of the traction current. With this change, we have lost between 30 minutes and 90 minutes time on track from an overall time of 3 to 4 hours. We have seen a reduction in productivity. Large tasks are taking twice as long to complete. However, our work bank is increasing, but only slowly, and it should remain manageable. The final point to make on the physical aspects is to do with vehicles. We have quite a small number of vans and flatbeds, which operated on a pool system. We brought in an additional 8 short-term lease vehicles, mainly small vans. Each team now has a flatbed and a van or a minibus, so that no sharing of vehicles across teams is required. Finally, moving on to the psychological piece. For me, this is as important as the physical measures we have taken. Even the strongest and most resilient of people can lose focus when their families are under threat. There can be no doubt that this virus is a threat to the health of all of our staff and their families. We all work in an environment that has numerous hazards that we must mitigate with safety procedures. Even in normal times, it can be difficult to keep staff focused if they have issues at home distracting them. None of the physical measures we introduced would have been successful if the staff failed to turn up or did not support and embrace what we were trying to achieve. My own favourite means of dealing with difficult topics and choices like these is to gather the team together and explain, discuss, listen, and sometimes argue it out. This was not an option, so we had to look at how we could hold a town hall meeting when we had no town hall to use. I was clear that we could not take a top-down approach. It had to be an open discussion, as this was the only way to get all the team on side, supporting the measures and, when necessary, enforcing them. I recognised that there was nothing I could do directly to influence or protect the family members of my staff. If they were taking sensible precautions, then by asking my staff to come to work, I was, in effect, introducing a risk to their family group that would cause them concern. If those concerns were not addressed, then the easy option for them was to stay home. In preparing this presentation, I looked back through my notebook. The last time I sat down with my senior team around the table was on Thursday, the 5th of March. The following Monday, I set up a nightly conference call with them, which has continued every day, Monday to Friday since. The following Wednesday, I established a weekly conference call with my 4 union reps. These conference calls initially were discussion groups to identify the challenges facing us and develop solutions. The draft ideas were then passed to the staff via the local managers and supervisors, who in turn fed back to my senior team thoughts, concerns, ideas from the staff. In effect, everyone had a voice in shaping the changes we were bringing in. Ultimately, 2 weeks later, when we started to implement the plans, I was therefore comfortable that nothing would come as a surprise to the team, and they would do all they could in making the plans work. The last piece of the communication puzzle was direct contact. We reviewed the contact details of all staff, checking that the phone numbers were correct. This was circulated to the senior team so that any member in self-isolation could be contacted directly. Maintaining that direct contact every few days ensured the staff and reassured the staff that they were not forgotten whilst off work and that we cared about their welfare and that of their families. Not being able to meet staff face to face, I still needed to put my voice across to them. To do so, I've been sending out a weekly note to staff. Initially, in week 1, as with the conference calls, it was about what we were planning to do and why. It has now developed into a rolling update on critical supplies, staff off work, and future developments. I'll now hand back to Duncan to conclude our piece.
Thank you, Jim. Before I wrap this up, I'd like to emphasise that our initial approach was purely based on how we protected our attendance. We didn't envisage the lockdown, nor the further controls placed by Public Health England. However, the measures we did put in place met the requirement, and as a result, we've been able to protect the service. So as always, we like to measure things, so I'll go through our key performance indicators for this year. So our injury rate is halved year to date. This, I'd have to say, would be expected because we have reduced our activities to essential in-time work only. From a COVID perspective, we've had 2 positive tests of personnel working for us, one a supplier who was a welder and one a skill track operative, a direct employee. Because of the measures we put in place, we were able to identify the personnel these individuals had interacted with in the previous 7 days, which was 1 person only for each case, and then determined that no further chain interactions had occurred between those personnel and other people. So we then placed them in isolation. With regards to these 2, neither of them tested positive for the virus, because although they worked directly with the positive people, they themselves had practiced distancing and used masks when this was not practicable. We have 117 people who are shielding or furloughed at the moment. However, of the 700 remaining personnel directly employed by us, our attendance is over 96%, consistently the best we've recorded. which shows the commitment of our teams and the confidence they have in the measures we've implemented to control the risks. As a result, we've completed 100% of our inspections to schedule and only have 2 temporary approved non-conformances on the network, which is a record low. Last week, we had the first 0 service affecting failure week, which means that there wasn't a single interruption to service recorded for the failure of the track asset, including temporary speed restrictions. This is all in the context of a running a reduced service, but the team really stepped up. The challenge as we start to build our service back up to a full working timetable is how we sustain the performance, build to a longer term preventative maintenance regime whilst protecting our teams, because we cannot continue with just in time against the standards. But the building blocks we put in place should stand us in good stead. And that concludes our presentation, and I hope it was of interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both Duncan and Jim. That was fascinating. Very interesting to see how the underground has coped with this, and very similar in a lot of ways to the Network Rail presentation, isn't it? Because everybody's here to provide a service, and people very quickly get into the logistics of it all, about like, what do we have to do, how are we going to protect our people, etc. And it's been very interesting from both presentations so far to see the care and attention, not just on delivering the tasks, but on looking after the people as well. So I will just move on now to our last presentation of today, which is being given by Joan McKinney. So Jen joined Metrolink in July 2017 as head of infrastructure, responsible for both infrastructure maintenance and incident response teams, and also the engineering, access and planning function. So quite a broad remit for Jen. She joined the rail industry 15 years ago. She had a year in industry with Grant Rail, Trackwork JV, delivering for track renewals for tube lines. And then she was sponsored by Volker Rail throughout her degree. She did a civil engineering degree, MEng, and she also had work experience with Volker Rail during that time. She joined Amey in 2011 as a graduate with a variety of roles, including Network Rail Civils Design, Home Office and Ministry of Justice Facilities Management, and was also involved with the Olympics, London Underground and Metrolink. She joined Tube Lines in 2013 and worked as a night track supervisor on the Northern Line track maintenance. She was also a construction manager for LU Track Delivery Unit project, and managed the rail grinding across LU, bringing it in-house and setting up a team to deliver across the network. So quite a change programme. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Jen. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jen McKinney, and I'm the head of infrastructure for Keolis Amey Metrolink. Thank you for having me today. It's a great opportunity to be able to talk to you about the challenges coronavirus has placed on Metrolink as us trying to keep Greater Manchester moving throughout. I thought it might be useful to give a bit of background on Metrolink for those of you who don't know that much about us. So Metrolink is now the largest light rail network in the UK. It's significantly expanded in the last decade. About 2/3 of the network have been built in the last 10 years. It's running at over 100 kilometres through 7 Greater Manchester boroughs. We've got a pretty extensive geographical coverage, as you can see from the map. So we've got converted old heavy rail lines from Altrincham and Bury. We run up to Rochdale and down to the airport. And we've got all of our services running through our critical corridor in the centre, where you've got Hornbrook and Deansgate Castlefield. And then a pre-coronavirus timetable, we've got over 1,300 services a day over this particular section. So hopefully this gives you an idea of why it was so important for us to be able to keep the tram service running for key workers during this time. We've got 8 lines, including the new Trafford Park line. There's now 99 stops. We've got 2 depots at Queen's Road and Old Trafford. There are 120 trams, and we're expecting 27 more as part of our capacity improvement projects, although this is one of the projects that has been delayed somewhat by COVID with the manufacturing and delivery of the trams themselves. Keolis and Amey commenced as operator maintainer in July 2017. And we've got a 7+3 year contract, and Manchester Metrolink is owned by Transport for Greater Manchester, TFGM. Keolis and Amey is a joint venture partnership, so we've got international public transport operator Keolis, and then we've got Amey for our infrastructure and asset management specialisms. We currently have 3 joint ventures, so we've got Docklands Light Rail in London, Wales and Borders, as well as Metrolink. To give you an idea, the teams under my remit, maintenance and incident response, I've got the track and civils team, signals and telecoms, and the electrical and mechanical teams. And I've also got, and this is a more recent addition, gaining this team just before Christmas, the engineering, access and planning function. So we provide access not only to deliver our own maintenance works, but for third parties and projects, with TFGM being the ones who deliver renewals and enhancements. So this presented a number of challenges, including, you might be able to see from my org structure, the fact that I had a vacancy for my engineering planning manager. So I quite quickly recruited earlier in the year somebody who's a secondee from Amey, with bringing in network rail expertise, and this was part of a BAU project to overhaul our planning and access function, and adapting network rails processes is our target. But with the concerns with coronavirus, providing guidance around access and planning and permits work on Metrolink has been essential, and there have been quite a number of additional measures, and this is so that we can ensure the safety of our staff, anybody working on the network, and the assets during this time. This was really to ensure that the essential works were the ones that were prioritised and what we were undertaking. So we introduced a RAG rating system so that we could clarify the priorities of the access requests. And this was for my own teams, with our safety resources and the potential for limited competencies, but also our control room on the operations side of Metrolink, who are on lockdown. So we've had a number of additional challenges in terms of the paperwork for an organisation that's quite reliant still on bits of paper. We've had to quite quickly change our approaches. Coronavirus has required that we've implemented emergency rosters for each of the disciplines. We've had quite a number of team members who've self-isolated, particularly at the start of the pandemic. So we had to ensure that each of the teams was able to still deliver not only the essential maintenance, but the incident response, which is particularly important for the S&T team. And we've been keeping on top of the latest government coronavirus advice, which has regularly been updating so that we can make sure we're doing what's best for our teams. So this has been protecting our shielding team members, so we had some of them working from home and supporting the welfare logistics, and since then a few have been furloughed. We've got single occupancy vehicles wherever practical, and that has essentially meant all of our frontline infrastructure teams who've been able to have vehicles to themselves. We've been quite fortunate. This was just timing. We actually had our new fleet arriving, so a bit of a challenge managing to get a hold of some of the vehicles right at the start of lockdown. But it has meant that we've had quite a number of vehicles because we haven't off-hired the previous lot yet. We've staggered our start and finish times with more of the electrical team in particular working on nights. We've kept constant teams within the rosters as far as possible. So essentially within our track team, we've got them within teams of 3 that are consistently working together on the patrolling side of things. And wherever possible, we've had our team members working from home and deploying from home to their work sites and incidents wherever practical. And we put in place a number of measures so that we've been able to socially distance in the depots and on our work sites. So in the midst of all of the challenges with coronavirus that coronavirus has presented, The new Trafford Park line that was constructed by MPT, so Langer, Focus and Thales are the ones who've constructed all of the extensions on the Metrolink network. This went launched into service on the 22nd of March this year. So this was a real challenge. We spent the early part of this year and a lot of last year preparing for the launch of a new service. The decision was that this was a vital service to key workers in the area, so we continued with the launch as planned, and it is actually 7 months ahead of the original schedule. And the very next day, on the 23rd of March, the UK was placed in lockdown to protect the nation from Covid-19 virus. The Trafford Park line runs through Europe's largest industrial estate, providing access to thousands of jobs. So this included global brands like Keolis and Unilever, and it is part of Greater Manchester's progress towards having a London-style network. So from the 23rd of March, Metrolink services reduced to operate a 12-minute frequency across the network. This is scaled back from what is predominantly a 6-minute service across the network, and we reduced our operational hours. So we ended up having Monday to Saturday 6 a.m. till 11 p.m. and on Sundays 7 a.m. till 11 p.m. So this was quite good, has been quite good from an engineering perspective. We've had a greater white period available to us. So this has really offset the additional time that it's taken for the safety measures around our engineering works. There has been a 95% drop in patronage with our customers staying home. So from the 6th of April, we reduced the service further. So we moved to a 20-minute service frequency to ensure that we kept Greater Manchester's key workers moving. This was taking into consideration the decrease in the demand for public transport at this time. But we've continued to operate services across all of the lines, however, did shorten the service, so with the end of service being at 10 p.m. And importantly, we put out more double units, so not all of our routes would use double tram units, but to enable better social distancing to be maintained for key workers making essential journeys. All of our routes provide double units, and we're currently in the process of working out plans to ramp back up service. So we're due to be moving back to a 12-minute frequency from the 26th of May, and putting lots of measures in place for that. One of the things that has been absolutely critical during this time has been providing clear and consistent communication to our teams, and really crucially the frontline teams. It's been essential to make sure that they're getting the message across. So we put in place specific engineering briefing updates that we've been providing regularly to them. And we've switched over all of our meetings and our briefings to utilise the technology available to us. So we use Microsoft Teams, which has been a fantastic tool enabling us to do this. So we've had a series of regular updates, welfare checks and briefings that have taken place with our Director of Engineering holding one initially daily, and now it's every other day. I've been able to do the same with my own management team, and then support the different disciplines with their own briefings as well. So we've put in place special coronavirus related safety signage, and this has been created to help keep our team members safe, and it's been one of our ways of addressing one of their concerns. The messaging has been to ask members of the public to respect Metrolink staff and to observe social distancing when they see essential maintenance taking place, to help us keep the network moving. We've been asked to volunteer for volunteers across Metrolink to support TFGM's wider social media campaign, to show our support for key workers and to thank the people of Greater Manchester for protecting the NHS and making only essential journeys. So my 4-year-old Izzy, who's a budding engineer and always wants wants to help out, recorded a short message asking people to help keep our engineers safe. So if anybody's interested, you can see that on TFGM's Twitter account. There have been a considerable number of measures that we put in place to help keep our teams and the public, but the ones I'm focusing on are our teams safe during this time. So we've had additional welfare vans deployed to work sites to enable easy access to hand washing facilities. And this isn't something that you usually need on a network of Metrolink size with multiple staff welfare facilities around the network already. Our cleaning provider, Cordant, have done such a fantastic job, and they've introduced antivirus cleaning to all of the touch points into our regime, which actually really helped with some of the nervousness for some of our team members out there. We distributed vast quantities of hand sanitizers to our frontline colleagues, and actually had the help of one of the local gin distilleries that provided quite a number of bottles, because they converted their operation to being able to make hand sanitizer. Metrolink is an open network, and we've got street running sections through the city centre. So unfortunately, there have been a few incidents of antisocial behaviour, which has caused, understandably, a bit of concern from my frontline teams. So to really support them and their well-being, we've got our security business partner on the operational customer side of the franchise, and our security provider to help out and collaborate. So they've supported us with some of the security guards to protect my frontline teams when they've been undertaking key maintenance, like points maintenance and re-railing in the city centre where we had a rail break. It's helped us where we've had to do welding for ultrasonic defects and the like. So this really has been quite key. And our HR and learning and development teams that have been fantastic in their support with having online welfare sessions and regular welfare catch-ups. We've had numerous essential maintenance activities that we've had to risk assess and develop a new safe system of works with the evolving coronavirus guidance. We've had a huge amount of support from our health and safety business partner and the safety team within Metrolink, who hold daily regular reviews with the wider Keolis and Amey, so that we can draw in best practice, which is really fortunate for us. And also we've been working with our key suppliers. So the pictures here are of our central overhead line inspections, which are undertaken by our partnership supplier PodTrack. So you can see some of the additional measures they put in, more PPE, like wearing masks for a task that wouldn't necessarily require it, and single occupancy mutes to support social distancing. And we've formally implemented a temporary approved non-compliance process, so the tank process, which is common on LU. We didn't actually have formalised it in Metrolink previously. We haven't had to have very many, but it's good to be able to have that type of process so that we can use the ORR's coronavirus guidance if we do have to risk assess some of our activities, and we've got a consistent way of documenting the way in which we might change some of our inspection frequencies. Continuing to progress some of our key projects in the background so that we're fit for the future has been really vital, particularly when we know that there are going to be additional funding challenges that coronavirus is presenting. So continuing to focus on our improvement projects and utilising technology, it's really become increasingly invaluable. We're in the process of upgrading agility or asset management system, and we've started and we're trying to expedite the rollout of our agility mobile devices across the organisation. And this is really paramount in enabling our multidisciplinary teams to be able to work collaboratively and to support our frontline team members staying safe and not having to pick up paperwork and the like unnecessarily. We've been trying to use the latest technology to automate certain tasks, and this will really help us not only keep our people safe, but reaping the efficiency benefits. With automation and data analytics playing such a huge part in this, We've got a tram-mounted remote condition monitoring project, which our engineering team has been working on in the background, and they've continued to progress as much as they can. Although one of the initial challenges we had with coronavirus was in the commissioning of our equipment that was due to happen in February, as our key supplier, Selectra, is based in Italy. So the impact of coronavirus started having an effect on Metrolink fairly early on because of this. The intention, though, is once this is implemented, one tram trip is going to be able to help us capture a holistic picture of the overall conditions. So we'll be able to get the data for the overhead heights and staggers and contact wear thickness at the same time as the rail profile measurements and ride and track quality. So it's helping us to progress towards proactive and preventative maintenance approaches, which is going to be, it was already essential, but it's becoming increasingly essential in the current climate. And integral to achieving this has been leveraging the expertise and experience from the wider Keolis and Amey and drawing on best practice. I'm immensely proud of all my teams at Metrolink who've adapted and embraced quite a lot of change quite quickly. We've had to streamline a number of our processes and really embracing the challenge of being able to work remotely wherever possible. And a lot of it wouldn't have been possible without the commitment from our support functions, from the engineering team, our collaboration with operations, key suppliers, and TFGM as well. So I just wanted to say thank you for your time today and being able to give you an update on Metrolink and a bit about the experience of the light rail industry.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Jen. Thank you. That was very interesting. It's, you know, across these three presentations, I guess a couple of things have come out very clearly to me. So people have been very responsive to change, you know, and sometimes we're seen as a bit of dinosaurs in the rail industry, that no one will change anything. But here people have acted very quickly to change and embraced it and found new ways of working. And this whole thing about railway workers providing essential services, critically important, helping both essential workers in the health service, etc., to get to and from work, and also helping with the movement of goods that are essential for the country. And very pleasing to see that all employers put an equal focus on not just reorganising the work, but also the consideration that they have given to the health and well-being of their people is very, very welcoming to see. So what I'd like to do now is just to open the lines to Andy now, because Andy's controlling the question and answers. So Andy, over to you.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes, all good. Thanks, Andy. Yep.
Excellent. Right. Okay. Because there's less than 100 of us on the line at the moment, I think it's probably best if you've got a question, if you want to unmute and ask the question to everybody. So if we've got anybody who wants to ask one.
Can I start then? So I've got a question really for everyone. So all of the speakers have talked about how they had to increase their number of vehicles in order to separate people, and therefore putting more vehicles on the road, which we all know is quite a big risk to manage. So I'm just wondering what their thoughts on how they have sort of done a trade-off, I guess, in their own minds about between the risk of COVID and the risk of increase in road traffic accidents.
Joan, I can answer this if you like.
Go on then.
So, and we've spoken obviously as a part of the South Alliance work, but yeah. for network rail maintenance, when we consulted with our health and safety reps about the increased risk of road vehicle accidents. I guess there's two things. I guess the risk of you being struck by someone else or fatigue causing you to have an accident. So fatigue, we were happy about. We've got good controls in place for fatigue. Mind you, saying that, I guess there were all the way through, there were new and different things turned up with fatigue. So whilst we have good controls in place for rostering and the like, things like homeschooling caused some people sleep deprivation, I suppose. So we've had to just keep aware, I guess, of things that we don't necessarily know about. You can't assume everything from a rostering tool. And then from the actual road vehicle risk, when we spoke to our health and safety reps, they were willing to increase the road vehicle risk, but with some considerations. Those mainly being overall we're doing less work, so we downturn the standard. So we were doing, dare I say, essential maintenance. Also, the roads were less busy, and that was a factor. And when we weighed it all up with the reps were happy to take the road vehicle risk over the infection risk, and that's what swung it. They said they'd rather do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy thing to manage. It'd be interesting to hear, maybe from Duncan and Jim what their thoughts are on that, because I obviously have to do the same. Jim spoke about getting more vehicles.
I guess the projects, Joan, our maintenance teams operate within a delivery unit area, and they don't necessarily go across boundaries, so they don't have to go that far compared to projects.
So from my perspective on the two lines, we had a very small vehicle fleet to start with, and we tended to move the vehicles around, and we also had logistic drivers provided centrally of an evening for the health and safety, for the Hammersmith and City Line guys to do most of the humping and dumping and transport guys around. The first big issue we had with vehicles was when the logistics people said that the drivers could not carry passengers in the vehicles. It was drivers alone. And straight away that gave us a problem. So we had to say, thank you very much. We will provide our own drivers. Previously, we didn't use our own staff to drive flatbeds. But strangely, when we asked, we got a number of people who volunteered straight away. And we took them through the normal risk assessment procedures that we do for people to become registered company drivers. On the whole, I don't think the risk was any greater, even though we had more vehicles on the road than previously. In total, 8 more vehicles, so basically doubling our fleet for the two lines. The amount of traffic on the roads, particularly at night around central London, where all the H&C guys work, and up in Rickmansworth, as it's been described, halfway to Wales, there was no one on the roads. It was so quiet that the risk wasn't a big issue. And the union reps were more than happy. In fact, they were suggesting that we get more vehicles because they were concerned about carrying mixing teams. One of them said to me, if you're splitting all the guys down into these small little teams to protect them, and then you're having to say to them, use the same vehicle every night between teams, that kind of defeats the object. So we didn't really suffer any major problems with bringing the whole thing in.
Okay, thanks, Jim. It's interesting to get your perspective as well. And Jen, what about from your view?
So from a Metrolink perspective, sounds pretty similar to what's been described for LU. One of the things that's actually been quite interesting and is more unique to Metrolink is that road traffic collisions with our trams is something that we have a real problem with, and that was one of the things we were very nervous appropriately nervous going into the opening of a new line. And with the decreased traffic on the road, the incidents with damage to our trams has been significantly less. So that's been a positive change.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Andy.
Okay, Kevin Thurlow had a question that he's emailed through on chat. Kevin, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hang on a second, I've just switched the mic back on.
That's okay.
Yeah, my question was on the NR presentation. There was a comment that planned and unrecorded trek extents had been reduced due to the availability of additional paths, which allowed recovery of these. has an assessment of these recoveries been undertaken to discover if these will be one-off recoveries, or are they the result of systemic issues, e.g. poor timings, capacity constraints, poor planning? And if they are recovered at the moment, and they are systemic issues, what's going to be done to try and address those recoveries to make sure they consistently get recorded?
I think that one's for me. Yeah, it's Nick.
Yes.
Thanks for the question. Yeah. So there are a multitude of reasons why the recording plan doesn't hit 100%. I'm not in any way kind of like looking to apportion blame, but reasons, for instance, an elderly vehicle fleet, issues with train crews and drivers, the constraints of timetabling through the various parts, and then on the day delivery, signalers and controls and the like. So there's a whole myriad of reasons why the recording plan doesn't hit 100%. It does well. When you look at the resource that exists and what they cover, they do well. But with the main part of the work I'm doing with the task force, we need them to do very well, not just well. So we are looking to convert another 5,500 miles of PLPR, plain line pattern recognition, to train-borne, eddy current for rolling contact fatigue, and various other bits as well. So it's really important that the test train plan delivers everything. So during the COVID crisis, the one thing that's enabled us to catch up with the recording, I think, is the reduced frequency of other trains on the railway. So at the moment, the recovery is down to the opportunity that COVID has given with less trains. Obviously, that changes from today. However, there were other things in flight as well as taking advantage of the COVID opportunity. So, for instance, the PLPR train, of which there are a few, we're going to create a hot spare that can basically go around and collect or deliver lost runs. We are also able to legitimately, I'm advised, break the network code so that we can put test trains in through the working timetable and various other things, so that they get more robust pathing. You know, we want to keep the short notice and the short term, on the very short term planning, to an absolute minimum. I spoke with Jason last week, who runs the fleet, and they're experimenting with some more reliable loco types. And I'm with the rail delivery group on the 3rd of June, and we want. Well, I'm certainly going to lobby for an adjustment in the way that the trains are timetabled, in so much that if you look at there are certain routes where we would only want to run the train once every 28 days. But if you try and cancel a train for that once in 28 days scenario, it cancels the other 27 days as well, because that's the way the timetabling system works. So we're looking for some flexibility there. So there's a whole range of different improvement measures that are being put in place so that the COVID opportunity is not in vain.
Okay. Well, it's just that, having had years of experience with planning of the trains from a frontline end, or from a region stroke route point of view, I'm aware of a lot of the problems that are being put in place, and wondering whether whether it sounds like we have got a good opportunity to revisit some of the underlying issues.
There's like I say, there's a blend of issues, and each of the remedies is in different states of maturity, but we are making quite a lot of progress.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got another question from Steve, or I've got a question from Steve Featherstone. If Steve would like to ask it.
can't hear you, Steve.
We still got Steve or not?
Yeah, he's talking, but we can't hear him.
Okay. Steve's question is, as people return to work using their cars, how will we factor in the increased response times as roads become more congested? I suppose that's a question for all three of you, really.
What response time to faults, I guess, is it? I'm assuming is the context.
Well, as people return to work using their cars, right? There's going to be less people on public transport, isn't there? So, you know, incident and accident times are going to be increased, aren't they? The response time is going to be increased because the roads are more congested. Certain times of the day, for sure.
I mean, I guess, is it? Have we fully modelled it? No, we haven't. And there were certain areas where it was pretty bad anyway. I mean, certainly between Paddington and Reading, for me on my old maintenance job, it was always a challenge. Certain areas between Bristol and Bath as well in the West Country, but you know, all the same. So I think, to be perfectly honest with you, we haven't really modelled it. We don't know what it will mean yet. We don't know how many people are going to stay at home rather than travel, and how many people are going to take up, you know, the positions on the railway. So at the moment, I'd say it's a risk, and we don't clearly understand it. There are obviously things that we can do to mitigate. We know where transport hotspots are. But at the moment, I guess there may well be new or different transport hotspots. You know, we factor in response times. I guess we've had a luxury in the last few weeks of having the roads to ourselves, so we go back to normal, I suppose.
On Metrolink, we're looking to shift back to our original signalling and telecoms roster so that we've got the more of a full complement, so that we're assuming that there's going to be a kind of a back to normal, even though it will likely be less road traffic.
Yeah, from London Underground perspective, it's a difficult one to judge. We really don't know how many more people are going to use cars and how many of them will jump on the tube and the buses as they normally did. I found it very interesting, the fact that they were looking to ramp up services. From last Wednesday, the government was saying people who need to go to work should be starting to return to work, but don't use public transport, use your car. As of 7 o'clock this morning, congestion charges and ultra low emission zone charges and parking charges were all reinstalled in London. So that's kind of a mixed message. I suppose two things. Firstly, you've got the track issue, and then you've got the signals issue. For the underground, on the signal side, we have TOs and teams distributed all across the network during traffic hours, and they tend to be quite close. In central London, certainly, you probably only have maximum of 2 stations between signals teams that are available to go on site to deal with problems, and they tend to use a train to get there. For track faults, we obviously have the emergency response unit, and since the Olympics, all teams, I think there's 4 teams on days, or it might be 5 teams on days spread around the network. They have police drivers and blue flashing lights with the response teams, with the response from LUCC as well. So, having experienced that as an incident engineer at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning during peak in a police car with flashing lights trying to get through London, it worked, but it was a very scary experience. So I think we really don't know at the moment how it's going to affect us. We are hoping that using our normal procedures and our normal locations, we'll be okay. But time will tell whether or not we need to do something different about it.
Okay, thanks very much. Does that answer your question, do you think, Steve, or have you like to add something else? We still can't hear you. Okay, yeah, he's got a thumbs up. So, Andy Packham's got a question. If Andy, if you want to unmute. And,
yeah, can you hear me?
Of course,
Can
can.
people
Yeah,
hear me?
yeah.
Good. Yeah. Well, first
Yeah.
of all, thanks for all the speakers for really fantastic talks. Really interesting how everybody's adapted so well, and particularly encouraging to hear all the teamwork that's taken place, particularly on the industrial relations side with the unions and so on. That was really good to hear. It made me feel quite proud to be a member of this industry, to be honest. But my question is, when this is all gone, or let's assume that COVID-19 is conquered at some stage, there must have been things that we've learned during this period, adaptations we've made, new methods of working that have been adopted, that actually increase efficiency and move us forward for the future. So my question, I suppose, is, when this is all done, what things have we learned that will help us in the future that we wouldn't have even thought of before?
For me on Metrolink, I think it's just reinforced how important it is that we're making some of the changes. Although we're almost 3 years into the franchise, it's still fairly early days. So one of my last slides was around the best practice we're trying to introduce from either from Network Rail or from LU or other light rail systems. And I think it's helped to demonstrate to some of my teams who haven't worked elsewhere just why it is so important that we shift towards handheld devices and we try and automate our processes and we get away from the amount of paper that has been traditionally used in the light rail industry, and that technology is our friend, and that we have to adapt. We had to adapt anyway, but it's become all the more important, and I think it's helped to highlight why we're doing some of the work that we're doing.
From a Network Rail perspective, standards changes and the like, and consultation seems to take far too long. We have rewritten numerous standards and done it quickly. We've had daily National Health and Safety Council or National Maintenance or Operations Council calls to consult fully but quickly. And I guess what we've proven is that we can do an awful lot very quickly, stating the obvious when it comes to some of the changes that we've had to make. I think some of the more lasting ones that I guess it's right for us to challenge ourselves. If you look at performance on the mainline railway, and I recognise it's not been anything like as busy, but the right time arrivals is 88%. PPM is at 97%, and we've got to look at how many what things were we doing to the railway before that aren't adding value to it, and therefore why are we doing it? And I think that there will be a challenge on that. The other thing which I'm genuinely pleased about, certainly from a track worker safety point of view, is that when Margam happened last year, we were doing 25,000 hours a week with unassisted lookout working, which was the highest cause of near misses. Immediately before COVID, we were down to 15,000 hours a week. And when I spoke in Manchester at the PWI conference, we were at 15,000 hours a week. Last week, we did 6,000 hours with a flag. So we've gone, we've reduced by nearly 80% the amount of lookout working since Margam, and the biggest reductions have been achieved over the last 4 to 6 weeks. And I think it's really important that we use this opportunity to really challenge ourselves on the things that really matter. Okay, so does that help?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I think from a personal perspective, I certainly, like most people, you can reflect on what are the true value-add activities you involve yourself in. We have finite capacity, and certainly it's become apparent to me that I was involved in a lot of non-value-add activity in my weekly life pre-COVID, and that probably resonates with some of my management team as well, about really just sticking to what our core deliverables are, because our key performance indicators really do show that when we focus on the right areas and consistently do it, that we can deliver even better performance than we've done before. And I think that we've also really engaged better with our teams. We've also had a good relationship with them. I know the narrative outside of London Underground is that we have this slightly fractured relationship between the trade unions and the management team, but that isn't my experience on a day-to-day working level. And I do think that the leadership that my team have shown and the with their teams is certainly going to stand us in good stead going forward. And their use of technology as well is also significantly improved. Jim will have a much better handle on that than I will.
Yeah, I'd say there's a number of things which we need to build on. And I think Doug is quite right. The level of acceptance of change from the guys and the support from the trade union reps in the whole thing has been, quite frankly, astonishing. I'm exceedingly proud of the way my guys have stood up and got on with the job. Given all the concerns, they're normal human beings, they must be worried about themselves and their families. The use of technology is an interesting one. I started on the GMP side of life where our technology was slightly better integrated than I'm seeing now. I'm on the SSL BCV side of the house, but we're heading in the direction of bringing it all together. And I think that's really, really important. The amount of paperwork we still produce or were producing is quite astonishing. And the fact that for the last 8 weeks or so, it's been minimal. And we still got the job done, and we still get it done to standard, and we still get it done safely. It's fantastic. So we need to push that one really, really hard. But one point for me personally as well, I used to spend a lot of my time during the week actually on underground trains, moving from point A to point B for various reasons. I haven't set foot on an underground train for 7 weeks. I haven't needed to. I'm still going into the office. I'm still maintaining that direct contact with people that I need to maintain direct contact with. Obviously, some things have dropped by the wayside and are being pushed to the right until we come back to some sort of normal working. But we've held meetings online which have been quick and concise, and we've got the job done using technology. And I think we need to push that really, really hard. Some meetings we still need to have face-to-face. Some meetings it's key to have the ability to look around the room, look around the table, see people's body language when they're talking to you about things. But others, process meetings and things like that, we should be using technology more and more and more to make them happen. The amount of time, I'd hate to estimate how many people with manager in their title on London Underground spend time travelling back and forward on trains to go to meetings. It's an extraordinary waste of time. And as Duncan said, good lean principle. It's not value added, it's waste. We should get rid of it.
Okay. I said if nobody's got any more questions, I'll hand over to Kate again and Joan to close up the meeting.
Okay, thanks very much, Andy. So I guess this is the time now we come to thank the speakers. We really do appreciate the time and trouble that you've taken to pull together the presentations and to come on here today and share your experiences that you've gained over the last number of weeks. The PWI certainly appreciates you've all got busy jobs, and I'm sure this is not high on your priority, but I really do appreciate the time and trouble that you've taken to put the presentations together. So thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Andy for being fantastic at managing the questions, and Kate as well, because Kate has got all members of the PWI team up to speed with using this technology. Sometimes it works better than other occasions, but today it's been fine. So that was grand. Thanks very much, Kate. And then just to remind you, we've got 2 further talks in this series. Next Tuesday is a similar sort of thread of presentations, but from the perspective of people in the supply chain. And that one will be hosted by Stephen Barber, our CEO. And then the last event in this series is on Tuesday, the 2nd of June. and that's a bit more to do with rail plant and equipment to the front line, and that one was going to be hosted by Brian Counter. Just to let you know, the presentations today have been recorded and they will be online probably later on today or maybe tomorrow. I'm not sure, Kate, if you want to confirm on that.
Usually it takes a couple of days, but yeah, they'll be on the website.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, so just thank you very much for everyone who has joined. And as always, we'd really appreciate your feedback and what you thought of this form of delivery, the time, etc., etc. And if you've got any ideas or tips for improving going forward. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.